Hi, I'm Audrey Melzer, and I am the Director of Orchestras for the Oberlin City Schools District in Oberlin, Ohio. The community that I teach in is west of Cleveland, Ohio, so we're pretty close to Lake Erie and Cleveland, and we're up here enjoying our beautiful weather right now, actually. It's just cold and dreary right now, so I imagine that there it's beautiful and sunny. So, well, I'm really happy today to be able to offer a little bit of my thoughts on this topic. I'm really honored to have been asked. And so I hope that what I talk about today will be beneficial to anybody who's looking to get into the work of social justice and equity. So my session today is titled Beyond Repertoire, Social Justice and Equity in the Orchestra Classroom. And just so that you're clear on where I'm coming from, I am a grades 5 through 12 orchestra director, and I have also taught at the Suzuki level. So I've started students as young as 3 years old, and I've worked in public school settings as well as private lesson settings. Okay. So I think that when we do this kind of work, we need to first address where we're coming from. And so I wanted to talk about my positionality, who I am, what led me to feel the way that I feel about this topic, and what I bring to this work and what I bring to my classroom every day. So I actually prepared a bit of a statement because I feel like my upbringing as a child was really helpful in preparing me for this work. So I'm going to read it, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it as needed. Okay. So I identify as a Black American / St. Lucian cishet woman who was raised in a multicultural home in the suburbs of Cleveland. So my father is from St. Lucia, and he immigrated here when he was in his teens, and my mother is a Black American. I began my formal music education at 8 years old when I began taking piano lessons, and musical talent runs in my family, right? We have very many working musicians. None of them are really classically trained, but they're all phenomenal, and they tend to be church musicians. And my paternal grandfather was a classically trained euphonium player in St. Lucia. Unfortunately, he had to stop playing when he immigrated to the United States, and so I never got to hear him play. But he was a constant in my musical studies. Like, he was always there to give me tips and tricks. He always wanted to hear me play. And he was always very supportive of me. As a matter of fact, my whole family was very supportive, even though there were no professional classically trained musicians in the family at the time. So as a child, my piano lessons and the love of my school orchestra program in Berea, Ohio, were considered really strange in my community. And by my community, I mean the Black community where I lived, because most of the time, Black students weren't largely represented in the orchestra program. You'd have some in the band, but most of them would go to the choir. And after a certain point, you didn't have a lot of Black students involved in the music program at all. So the fact that I was taking private lessons, the fact that I was really active in my school orchestra program was seen as a little odd. And I embraced that. I embraced being the odd one out. There were a few of us in the orchestra program over the years. I definitely remember having a couple Black friends there with me. But I wanted to stress this point that during that time, we never played any music that we identified with culturally. And by culturally, I mean like ethnically, racially. So of course we covered like pop music sometimes, and we did like some radio, not radio, I mean movie music, like Jurassic Park was huge, Forrest Gump was huge, but we never experimented with experimented with any alternative styles, nothing like that. It was all like classical or mainstream music, right? But that being said, my teacher was fabulous. Her name was, or is, she's still alive, Mrs. Debbie Wesolowski, and I am forever grateful to her because she was so supportive and she was so kind. She was an older white woman who loved corny jokes and playing her loud Casio keyboard with us. We always had her drum beat going. And I really had little in common with her. Like, it's not like we totally meshed on a lot of things, but she ended up being the driving force for my music education and for my future. It was because of her that I got where I am today. I truly believe that and the support of my family. She saw my talent and nurtured it in the best way that she could, and she got me paid gigs. She recommended me for private lessons. She urged me to play the bass for the wind ensemble at the time because she knew I needed a little bit more of a challenge, and I had to get into those flat keys. She allowed me to teach and coach younger students and my peers, and I'm forever grateful because that meant that I was teaching from the time I was 15 years old under her supervision. I was a leader in the group, and she made sure that I had the support I needed to feel comfortable and confident in being that leader. Her encouragement led me to join youth orchestras and audition for regional orchestras. I learned how to conduct. I learned how to read scores at a young age before I went to college, and ultimately her support allowed me to feel like I had a chance at auditioning for colleges to get into a music education program. Because I really knew from an early age that I wanted to be an orchestra teacher just like her. I never saw another Black orchestra teacher during that time. I never saw anyone that looked like me teaching orchestra. And to this day, I have never had a Black music teacher. And I think that's really when BBIA people, Black, Brown, Indigenous, or Asian people say something like that, I think that our white peers are a little surprised because maybe they can't imagine what it's like to not see someone like you standing in front of the room and teaching in a place of authority, in a position of authority. But that was my life. Like, I have never to this day played under a conductor with brown skin like mine, to this day, living in Ohio. So I feel like this is definitely a strong case for representation and how much it matters to our young people. But even though I didn't have those things, my orchestra teacher, Mrs. Wesolowski, gave me what I needed to believe that I could, in fact, achieve my goals, and that it was not strange for me to want those goals. So, I feel like if I didn't have her saying, yeah, you could do it, you can do it. No, don't worry about any of that. Like, you could totally do it. If I didn't have her in my ear, rooting me on, pushing me along, that I might have given up and decided to go into a different field because I didn't see anyone like me. But she made sure that I knew that I had a chance and I had a shot, and I will forever appreciate that. So it's because of what she did for me that I feel that this is what we need to do for our students. And this is why this work means so much to me. It means so much to me. I hope that I am able to give to my students what she gave to me. And I hope that I'm able to help other teachers do the same thing for their students. So before we get into relationships and what it means to have a strong relationship with your teachers, I would like to also talk about what I view the definition of social justice and equities to be. So social justice is justice in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within society. So in the orchestra classroom, we're thinking not necessarily of wealth, but we're thinking of the distribution of opportunities and privileges within our classroom, within our program. And then for equity, I see this as being the quality of being fair or impartial, but to further emphasize what that means for us, it would be involving distribution of resources based on the needs of the recipients. So this is a matter of giving students what they need. giving what students need to them, you know. So for instance, I have a pretty diverse program. For the area that I'm living in, I have a pretty nice group of BBIA students in my program, but you know, they come from all walks of life. Some students come from families that are upper to middle class, and a lot of my students come from families that struggle financially. And so there are some districts around us that just have programs, blanket programs, that say that you need to rent an instrument. And if you can't rent an instrument, then you can't be an orchestra. Well, that doesn't work for my community, because I want all kids who want to be a part of the orchestra to have a shot, to have a chance. So we do the best we can to offer instruments to the families that need it. And we make sure that that's clear, so that anybody who needs an instrument has something. So that is how, one of the ways that we go about distributing resources to our students. It gets a little tricky when it comes to things like private lessons and experiences like that. But fortunately, I've got some really great community partners that help with that on occasion, and I hope to do more as I move forward in this work. So I would like to start this section about relationship building as a vehicle for content with a quote by Dr. Baruti Kafele. And I don't know if you haven't heard of Dr. Kafele. He goes by Principal Kafele on social media. You really need to get to know him. This quote is fabulous. You can't separate the outside of the classroom experiences from the inside of the classroom experiences. It's just brilliant. It's so simple, but it's so brilliant. And I feel like we need to understand that building relationships with our students is so much bigger than just being friendly and giving a high five. It's actually getting to know our students, and so that we understand who they are and where they come from. And it gives us a way to appreciate who they are and what they may be going through at home or outside of our classrooms. So the things that you can use to get to know your students could be culture, music, getting to know their family cultures, any common interests that you have. Like, for instance, I love hip hop. And so my students are always surprised when I know the songs that they are listening to, or I know the dances and things. Sharing information about ourselves. You know, I happen to live in my community that I teach in, and my students go to school in my district, and my kids are actually students of mine in my orchestra program. So that really helps for me to have my students get to know who I am, who my husband is, and who my children are. And then it feels more like we're, have a more solid relationship and are actually a part of the same community. Now, everything that I just talked about, these are all things that help us build relationships. These are the ways we get to know our students and get our students to feel that we care about them. But these are the things that I'm going to talk about right now that hinder those relationships. So not asking students about themselves. You start class, you just jump in, you're all worried about, your concert or what you need to teach, and you're not really thinking about, who the kids are and how they're doing. Mispronouncing names and not apologizing or not acknowledging that could be harmful. I understand that, names are, can be difficult for a lot of people. I do understand that, but names are so special. My name is so special to me. And I did have a professor in college decide that the name Audrey did not suit me and that I looked more like a Michelle or a Denise. And so for 2 months, he would call me outside of my name, not because my name was hard to pronounce, but because he thought it was funny to change my name. Things like that are just completely disrespectful and minimize and diminish the experience in the lives of our students. So I strongly suggest and urge you to do the best you can to try to get to know your students' names. And even if you make a mistake in pronouncing it, please try to get it right, because that name means everything to that child. failing to interact with students who need help, failing to communicate with families, failing to empathize with family circumstances, believing that all students are the same and have the same challenges. Now, I feel like this is a matter of bias because we don't always know what's going on in other people's worlds and other people's lives. And so we think that we center ourselves. And so as teachers who are looking to do this work, we have to learn how to decenter ourselves, our experiences and our feelings, and really try to center the experiences of our students and their families. So this means making phone calls. This means doing check-ins. This means, reaching out and trying to get to know what that child is dealing with. And, not every family is going to be willing to work with you in this regard, but you need to make the effort. You need to try because you want that child to be successful, and they will not be successful if they don't see you at least trying to reach them. Another thing that hinders relationship building is failing to nurture the whole child, physically, emotionally, mentally, academically. We get stuck, especially around concert season or festival season. We just want to get that music done. We just want to get it over with. And we want to, get that superior rating. And we may not be thinking about what's going on in those kids' lives. So for instance, I notice that toward the middle of the year, all of my seniors are MIA. They are missing in action emotionally, mentally. They are just nowhere to be found. And I started paying attention to why that is. And I realized that the expectations on them for college are far greater than anything that I ever was dealing with. And so I now, sit down and I have like senior talks with my kids and like talk about, what they're getting ready to go through and try to prepare them and help them organize their time, even though it has nothing to do with my class, because a healthy kid is a happy kid and they're willing to do, to participate in class and participate in the program that we've built together. So getting to know the child and nurturing that whole child, that whole student is very important. Failing to show that you like or value a student. They just want to know that you care about them. Failing to be open-minded. Failing to recognize and deal with our unconscious biases about race, gender, socioeconomic status, dress, sexuality, and religion. Our students pick up on all of that. They see how we interact with them and they feel it. They are not stupid. Even our youngest students can feel that. And they'll say it in different ways. A senior might say, you disrespect me, you don't respect me. Whereas a kindergartner may say, you don't like me. And so while we don't necessarily have to be their friends, but we have to show that we care and that we value who they are. I usually bristle at the fact that at the phrase that students don't learn from teachers they like. I used to anyway, but now I don't. I totally see that differently now with more experience. And I would even go a step further and say that students don't respect teachers who don't respect them. And that goes with, interactions as well as cultural respect. What we know does not make our students beneath us. We can learn from them and they can learn from us. And I think that we just have to make sure that we respect who they are and what they have experienced and what they bring to the classroom. Okay, so the quote that I actually, so funny, whoops. The quote that I had from Dr. Kafele was actually for this next part, which was acknowledging the student lives outside of the rehearsal room. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm just gonna keep moving forward with this, so sorry. I think we've all heard about it, an invisible backpack, the baggage that kids bring into the classroom. But I would like to take it a step further. We all carry an invisible backpack, every one of us. We all have things that we're dealing with. We all have illnesses, whether they're, visible or invisible. We all have circumstances going on behind the scenes. And so we bring all of that into the rehearsal room with us. And the idea that students come to us so that we can put knowledge into them, so we could fill them like they're vessels, that just, I don't feel like that catches the whole issue here. Like, our job is not to just fill kids up with our knowledge, to just deposit it into them like a banking model. Our model is to, create learning opportunities with our students, to learn from them and have them learn from us, to be open to that exchange. But I do like the back analogy when it deals with us thinking about what is happening behind the scenes when a child comes into our room. If they seem to have a not so happy face, if they're low energy, if they forgot their instrument or their pencil, or they don't know where their music is, it's really easy to just blame the kid and think, oh, well, they just don't care. They're never prepared, all these things that we say. Their parents aren't supportive. And then meanwhile, especially now during COVID, you're dealing with a family that may have lost somebody to COVID-19, or you're dealing with a family who can't really afford to stay where they are, and so they're like living with family elsewhere and then coming to school when they can. Getting a pencil, having a pencil, or remembering their folder of music may be the last thing on their minds. They might be worried about whether or not they're going to eat that day. So being cognizant of what's going on in our students' lives is very important, and understanding that that does not sit outside of the classroom. That does not sit outside of the rehearsal. I think those of us who are older, think or have been trained that we're not supposed to, bring anything to the music. We're supposed to come, play the music, play what's on the page, and let the music speak for itself. But I think that the thing that makes music music is the human experience and the human emotion, and that we cannot separate them from each other. We just can't. And I don't think we should try, actually. So we're going to go back to what that invisible backpack might look like, and what we might be inherently thinking that backpack looks like. In your mind, you might be thinking that is dirty, old, and it's a painful load, right? But that student's backpack may not always be negative. Students bring so much good to our classrooms too. The music of their cultures is one thing. Their excitement for music is another. Their own creativity. Some students make their own music, and they come to orchestra and they want to and they're, playing away on their instrument, and they come up with this cute little ditty or this ostinato, and they just want to share it. And we're like, no, we have to work on something else. And, so we're not giving them space to bring the good that they have into the classroom. So we need to make space for that. I do think that sometimes we believe that their experiences are not important because we're trying to focus on what orchestra traditionally is, or what it has traditionally been, which is this focus on Western European art music and those cultures. But when we do that, we minimize the lived experience of our students. We stifle their voices, and we make it so that the students don't feel like they can see themselves in the lesson. So instead, Dr. Kafele has another great quote where he says, put the child in the lesson, put the child on the page, make it apply to them, right? Make what we're doing work for our students and allow our students to leave. This means lead. That means we're going to have to step outside of our comfort zone. Sometimes we're going to have to admit that we don't know things. Sometimes we're going to have to let other experts come into our space and demonstrate things for our students, sometimes we need to let our students and their families do that. And that's okay, because again, if what we're really working toward is a communal learning experience, where we're making music and we're enjoying music together, and it's like a 21st century learning environment, then those are the things we need to do. Okay, so now I will get to this slide, which is making music relevant to student lives. So there are a few things that I'd like to acknowledge when I talk about this topic. You know, we all know that orchestras are technically a Western European construct, but our students come from all walks of life. In the United States alone, most of our students at this point are from BBIA communities. So we have to acknowledge that. I also want to say that Western European art music is beautiful and wonderful, and it definitely should be taught. Like, absolutely. Some of my favorite composers are Bach and Mozart and Beethoven. Like, really, they are. I mean, Beethoven wrote great bass parts, so, you know, of course he is one of my favorites. But I feel like we need to challenge their place above all other genres and understand that they are not the only things that bring value into an orchestra program or orchestra curriculum. Students want to see themselves in the curriculum. They're dying to see themselves in the curriculum. And so we need to be the ones that try to give them that connection, because they want to feel it so deeply. We have to convince the students that what we're teaching them, what they're learning, has to do with them. And we need to show them how it has to do with them. We need to show them how it relates to their lives, which means that we're digging deep. We're digging a lot deeper than just, well, you got to learn the notes on the page so that we can play this piece of music for a concert. We're trying to, go into like the backgrounds of composers and the histories of the songs, and trying to tie in those things with what's going on in the students' lives today, what is happening in the zeitgeist, so that we know and that we can identify with that music and therefore make it more beautiful. Another idea I like to challenge is this idea that music is universal. I think that when I say that, people like bristle and they're like, what do you mean music is universal? I think music as a concept is universal, because everywhere on this earth there is music, and that concept is universal. However, the genres of music are not universal. They are not. So while I love the idea of Bach being played everywhere and reaching everyone everywhere, I also think that we should also value the music of cultures everywhere and let that also speak to us. Like, there's no reason why Bach has to be held higher than, other kinds of music and other composers. It just doesn't make any sense. I also think that the way that we approach music and this part of the world with like Western European notation and music theory and all that is not superior to any other way of playing music, playing by ear, learning by rote, songs being passed down over the generations, music not being written down, improvising instead of reading. Those are all fantastic ways of creating music. And so if we have the means to do that and to incorporate those things into our programs, I truly believe that we should. I think that this will make music in all of our lessons and rehearsals way more relevant to our students. So if you want to get the message across, or any message across to your students, you have to lay the foundation. And the foundation places value on your students' cultures and experiences. And it welcomes and it mingles with what we know. It mingles with what we know and welcomes what they know to combine. All right. So case in point, I'm going to talk a little bit about my program. This past term, just this term that we're starting in now, and I also want to mention that I am remote. We're remote teaching 100% right now, but preparing for a hybrid model. So I am still teaching orchestra over Zoom. So these are the pieces that I've programmed for my ensembles this term. Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart. My 8th graders and my high schoolers are playing that. Sunflower by Post Malone. That is a very popular song that you can still hear on the radio, but it's from the Into the Spider-Verse animated Spider-Man film. The Old Boatman by Florence Price, a fantastic African-American female composer. Mi Dolor by Carlos Marcucci, which is a salsa that I've programmed for my high schoolers. Voyager by Sunhi Newbold, I programmed for my 7th and 8th graders. And it's a tune that I know that they love because it's in that great tonality and it has lots of open strings and double stops, and that's their favorite thing. First Scale March by Richard Meyer for my beginners. And Abandoned Funhouse by Brian Balmages, another fun little original piece for my beginners. In my program over the years, we have played jazz arrangements, tangos, rock tunes, complete with electric bass guitar, electric guitars, and drum sets, all kinds of pop tunes. My favorite was All of Me by John Legend. That was top notch. We've done hip hop. We did an arrangement by Black Violin. My students loved that. We played folk songs and fill tunes, all kinds of reels, Irish jigs, good stuff all around. The only thing that I haven't been able to incorporate into my program as far as styles goes is like reggae and calypso, which is something that's a part of my positionality and part of my life. And I love that kind of music. So I'm working on that. Let's see, what else have I done? Oh, I've invited students to come and create beats for us to play warm-ups to, because I have students who are really great at looping and making hip-hop beats for their friends to rap over. So I said, well, why don't you make a beat for us and then we'll just loop it, and that's how we'll do our scales. Oh, that was exciting. Like that year, my students were thrilled. They loved playing scales that year. Let's see, this coming spring, one of the things I want to do is incorporate Black string band music into my program. So I'm working on learning a piece by rote so that I can teach it by rote. And we're gonna approach it without anything written down. And we're going to approach it like we're a jam band. So I'm gonna do that with one of my middle school classes this year. And last year, I did a research project about Black classical composers with my 8th graders. They did all the work, created these beautiful, posters, complete with information about each composer, a picture of the composer, as well as a UR code that scans to a recording of an example of the composer's work. And then I took those, printed them out, laminated them, and hung them up at the high school so that my high school students and anybody else who wanted to could walk around and scan with their phones and get a sample of this new composer that they hadn't heard of. It was a really popular project, and the students really felt ownership and felt that they could identify with those people and their experiences and their history. But I want to say that my biggest and most fun project was when my high school orchestra had a really in-depth discussion about the whole Larry Clark controversy last year. And I went back into all the social media postings and looked up information and presented it to them. And we had a big discussion about what it meant to appropriate materials and misrepresent yourself, and what do we do with works of an artist that may have acted in a way that we don't agree with? How do we consider that work? So it was really a good way to talk about this topic with students who've been playing music by Larry Clark this whole time, and just get a take on what the younger generations are feeling about this topic. It was really good discussion and they were really excited about it. But beyond that, I had welcomed music my students like into my room for listening exercises as well as dance breaks. Some days we're just not feeling it, so I put on a song and we just dance, we just boogie. Because actually, let's face it, learning to dance and being able to move your body to rhythm, that fits into music ensemble playing. That's how we make music. So, you know, my students always love asking me if they could play something or listening to a song that I've been listening to, and we'll dance a little bit, or I'll do the same listening activities with those songs as I do with some of our classical works as well. The other thing I really like to do is to play hand clap games. Like from when I was a little girl, we always would be on the playground and do these hand clap games. And so when I realized that some of my students knew those games, we started doing them in class, and we would just take turns and the kids would go around, and the kids who knew it would teach it to the other kids, and it helped with rhythm, but it like is represented from a whole nother culture. Like it's like little girl culture, it's Black girl culture. You know, it's the games that we all played. And so to take that and incorporate that into the music classroom has been a lot of fun, and the students have really taken to it. So here, I urge us or challenge us to rethink the mission of the school orchestra program. I think that the school orchestra program in the past has been a way to teach like more like cultural awareness, or like you know, based upon class. I think we kind of held classical music to the higher standard of being, and I think that, you know, it may be time to move away from that. I think it's time to move away from that. And I also think that we have to consider why we're doing this. It is our goal to get superior ratings at festivals? Is our goal to play the hardest music ever? Is the goal to be the best orchestra around? Or is the goal to foster a love of music with our students? Are we trying to, you know, create professional musicians, or are we trying to create appreciators of the music, of music and arts, who will then support music and arts later in life and allow their children to be, and their grandchildren to be part of these programs? So that's the way I view it. I view it as investing in the future of arts in this country. I don't view it as, you know, needing to have the best orchestra program. You know, when I get a superior rating at festival, I'm really excited, but it's not the end all be all. I like putting on concerts, but that's not even my focus. My focus is seeing the joy on my students' faces. My focus is encouraging a growth mindset, you know, to stop, to limit my students from saying, I can't do this, and getting so frustrated, and flipping that so that they understand that they just haven't done it yet. They just have to work a little harder and change things a little bit, and let's assess and see what it is that we can do, and reflect, and then maybe we can get it, and it takes time. I want them to have those skills when they become adults. I want to encourage strong work habits. I want them to know that, you know, things don't always come easy. And when they don't come to us easily, we don't give up. We just try again, and we figure it out, and we ask for help, and we advocate for ourselves. I want my students to know what it means to build a community and how to model how a community should work. In lieu of civics classes, you know, we really don't have anything that teaches about citizenship and what it means to be a good neighbor and a good community member. But I find that my orchestra program, my students understand that pretty well, because they understand that everybody has their role, and we have some top-notch players, and then we have players that may struggle a little bit, but everybody is important, everyone is valued, and everyone has a role to play, and everyone belongs. And I think that's what a school orchestra should be. I want it to be a creative outlet for my students. I don't want to stifle them. Just because we're, playing Einakon and knock music doesn't mean I can't have a student come up with a funky way and a beat to put behind Einakon and knock music. I want that there to be that creativity. I want them to feel free to do those things. And, of course, I want music appreciators. I want to grow music appreciators who will be patrons of the arts and fund art programs, because ultimately we have to create audiences, people who will, come and take advantage of all this fantastic art, and they will, fund it and make sure that it lasts. So when we're doing this work, there are some questions that we really need to ask ourselves as we move forward. And some of these questions might be a little uncomfortable. And some of the answers might be a little uncomfortable. But these questions are a good place to start when doing this work. Who do we encourage and why? Let me say that again. Who do we encourage and why? Who do we provide the best resources to? Who do we give the best instrument to? Who do we refer to private teachers and music programs outside of the school? Who do we give more time to, more personalized instruction to? Do we give priority to students who come from families that resemble ours? Do we judge families who don't look like ours, or maybe who don't behave like ours? And what do we do to make the distribution of opportunities and privileges equitable? So again, in my district, I mentioned that one of the things that we do is provide as many school instruments as we can. And in my district, the orchestra program provides the most school instruments for students and their families to use. And that is a good step. It is, but it's just a small step. I still would want to find funding for, private lessons and grants to send kids to camps and institutes and, as needed. And those are all things that I'm working on behind the scenes. And even though we haven't reached that yet, those are my goals. And that is because I want to make sure that the distribution of opportunities and privileges are equitable. I want to make sure that every child who wants to do this has access to what they need in order to be successful. And that's what it all comes down to for me. I want my students to see people who look like them. I want my students to feel like they belong. I want my students to feel as though they stand a chance and that they can achieve, that they can do this. And in order for me to do that, that means sometimes I have to put aside my personal feelings. I have to put aside my experiences and do what needs to be done to make sure that those children, those students, those families have the support they need, just like someone did for me. So there are some resources that I highly recommend when doing this work, when asking these questions about how to move forward, because, we can ask ourselves, but I feel like we also need to be challenged a little bit. We need to be in spaces where we can talk it out or hear people talk it out and make our mistakes and say things that we might need to get checked on. And then we need to be given the space to process our feelings off to the side so that this work can actually get done. So here are some resources that you might want to look into. The National Association for Music Education, NAFME, has done some wonderful things. This summer, when unfortunately we had that terrible, terrible situation with the death and I'll just call it a murder of George Floyd, a lot of arts organizations came out with statements about Black Lives Matter and what that meant for their program. And I have to say, I was pretty proud of NAFME for the statements that they made and the resources that they provided to music teachers. So definitely check out what they have going on their page. Website and magazine to look into. Teaching Tolerance is a great resource, consistently has amazing things to consider. It's about all kinds of subject matter, but it applies to things to everything that we do. Reading the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, definitely a place to start. It'll make you dig deep. It'll make you feel things, and it'll definitely give you things to process. A book that I'm reading currently that was recommended to me by my principal is Young, Gifted, and Black, Promoting High Achievement Among African American Students by Teresa Perry. Definitely a book to look into. It's a collection of essays, and it talks a lot about the needs of Black students in order to, achieve in this learning environment. You should follow Principal Kafele on Twitter. Definitely find him. He has YouTube videos that he does, like that he live streams on the weekends. So you think it's Saturday morning, and you can sit down and listen to him, and it's like going to church, but for education. Love it. I love everything Principal Kafele says. I love what he does. Some good podcasts. The Score. It's an urban music education podcast. You can find it on Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. Code Switch by NPR. Great podcast. Recently, they talked about the acronyms that we used to group people of color together, and they talked about brown, Black, brown, indigenous people, and then people that I actually worked with in this next nonprofit that I talk about, they've actually coined another term. So, it's a really good place to start with that type of learning. Another podcast to listen to is Nice White Parents, that was put out by New York Times about maybe a month or so ago. It's a 5-episode podcast, and it goes deep into the role of nice white parents in education in New York City. And I think you'll find that a lot of the things that they talk about, you can identify with, you may have seen in your own districts or anywhere as you were growing up in your own education. The nonprofit Decolonizing the Music Room, fantastic nonprofit. They have a website. They put out all kinds of webinars and trainings, and they have a lot of articles and things, really thought-provoking stuff. You should definitely check out the website for Decolonizing the Music Room. And then once you check out the website, if you're interested in digging a little deeper, these are some Facebook groups you can go to. Decolonizing the Music Room has a Facebook page. And this is a wonderful place where people can share resources, but it is also a brave space. This is a place that's not like a lot of other music education spaces. This is not a place where you go to mine for information. This is a place where you bring your research with what you've been looking at, and then you ask questions to kind of help you with your situation. And you have to be prepared to be told that maybe you're missing the mark, or maybe you could do something differently, or maybe that this is offensive, because that's how this work gets done. It's not a safe place, a safe space. It's a brave space. And then another Facebook group that you can look into is Social Justice Music Educators on Facebook. So that is pretty much all I've got at this point about this topic. And I really hope that the things that I've been able to say and the things that I've brought up have been helpful to you. And if you have any questions or comments, you could feel free to reach out to me. This is my work email address, amelzer@oberlinschools.net. And I look forward to hearing from you. And happy music making, people. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for this continued conversation in Miss Audrey Melzer's Beyond Repertoire session. My name is Tiffany O. I serve as the orchestra rep for CMEA Bay Section, and I'm so honored to be in conversation today with Ms. Melzer. Ms. Melzer is the Director of Orchestras for the Oberlin City School District in Oberlin, Ohio. She is a string specialist and active performer, a bassist in her 16th year of teaching. She serves as a faculty member of the Community Music School in Oberlin, and as well as the Suzuki program and at the Music Settlement and the El Sistema program at the Rainey Institute. Ms. Melzer is a moderator for the Decolonizing the Music Room Facebook group and will also be a panelist at the upcoming session, How Do We Confront Racism in the Orchestra Classroom, at this year's Midwest Clinic. Audrey, thank you so much for being here today and for your willingness to share your expertise. I so appreciated your presentation, and I'm honored to continue the conversation with you here.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
I loved that you shared at the beginning of your presentation your positionality, talking about your experience as a Black woman in the Western orchestra world. And you shared the story of a teacher who really supported you in becoming an orchestra teacher and pursuing this path. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about representation and what that meant to you and what that means to you in our world.
Yeah, I had a fantastic orchestra teacher in my public school system, Mrs. Wazlowski, who recently retired, and on her last year before she retired, I actually subbed for her for an extended period of time, and it was very nice to go back full circle to see where I was supported and where I came from and where my career basically started. But yeah, I didn't see any examples of people who looked like me locally. Like, my parents were really good about trying to find representation for me. You know, we watched a lot of PBS programming and whatnot, give me a chance to see other people out there. But in my neighborhood, in the orchestras that I was a part of, I was usually the only female bass player, and then I was also one of the very few Black students. And so that was hard. That was really hard. And I think that at the time, people thought that, you know, me just being there was like diversity and inclusiveness, and my discomfort was a little ignored. And I think that because I was so young, I learned to hide it. I learned to put it aside and not say anything about it, even though, you know, I dealt with comments and things like that. But I really think that as far as becoming an orchestra teacher goes, I never thought I couldn't do it, you know, until I went to college. And that's the part that I left out of my talk earlier, because that's just too deep of a conversation.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I went to conservatory that I realized, whoa, this world is like, this career, this field is really white.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't understand where I was coming from, or they didn't understand that my goals were slightly different, you know, that I wanted other people that looked like me to be a part of my program. But yeah, I didn't meet another female Black orchestra director until I was in my 20s, a little bit after my education ended. And then I ended up becoming her successor in her program.
Wow.
So, Harriet Thomas. Yeah.
That's
Harriet
so cool.
Thomas, the orchestra director here. Yeah.
You talked about like what is the point of us being orchestra directors? Is our goal to create more conservatory students, or is our goal to create lifelong appreciators of music who will become patrons of the arts and who have an experience? I love that you pointed out being in an organization that's functional and like learning about civics, perhaps even.
Oh, thank you. I didn't. As I was teaching those things in my classroom, you know, it was like these little epiphanies that pop up when you're on the podium, and I'd see my students like maybe pick on each other a little bit or make fun of somebody who's struggling. I'm like, no, everybody belongs here. Everybody has a role. Let's see how we can help everyone be successful. And I even made it so that my principal players, like, I don't even call them principal players in my program. Yeah. I call them just section leaders, and I can have up like 2 or 3 or in a section.
Totally.
And yeah, and those students, maybe they have a little stronger leadership roles, or maybe they're better players, or they've been playing longer, and they are my little generals. Like, they help man the orchestra and command the orchestra. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Actually, I think it builds a family, and that's what I want.
Certainly, I love that. And I think those are some examples specifically of little ways that we can challenge this Eurocentric Western art music that we grow up in. And I think you did a wonderful job of highlighting it's not that this system is completely faulty, or that it's negative, or that we shouldn't be playing Bach and Mozart. It's just that there are so many other ways that we can also show our students that other cultures, other collectivist ideas are just as equal, and I think that's wonderful. You shared the importance of decentering yourself as the educator, and you asked some really important reflection questions. I think for orchestra educators to consider in this work. I think some of this audience will be coming at this from many different places. Some folks just entering this thought process, some folks who are maybe well versed in this kind of work. But as we ourselves and our colleagues, we navigate this lifelong path toward a more equitable music space, we're all bound to make mistakes, right? I certainly think about the murder of George Floyd as a big a reason why a big focus has been taken to social justice work. And I think even just in the last few months, there have been lots of conversations that lead to hurt, or that lead to mistakes in social justice work that might hurt others. And I think it's important to consider that impact is more important than intent. But I'm wondering if you might be willing to share some best practices in regards to making mistakes. And I know that you've done a lot of this work with being a moderator on the Decolonizing the Music Room Facebook group.
Right, right. I've done a lot of work with this topic there at the Decolonizing the Music Room Facebook group, but I've also done it a lot in my life recently. So as I've got family members who we're trying to bring along. And so that's been definitely a challenge. And then fortunately, my district started doing this work last year, like early last school year. And so that was a pretty big deal for us, or the year before, actually. Yeah, the year before we started doing like cultural competency and equity literacy work. And we had to talk about these very challenging conversations, and that it was okay to make mistakes. Like, you're going to make mistakes. You have to, when you're doing this work, you have to recognize that you do have unconscious bias. We all do. It's a human thing. And that's that. And that's something that you're going to be dealing with, for all your days. And then because of that, we're going to make assumptions, we're going to jump to conclusions, and we're going to make mistakes. And so we have to learn how to be gracious when we make those mistakes, and to take feedback, even if it's not nice, because sometimes it has to be pretty blunt and forceful and firm in order for you to get it. And you have to realize it's not a personal attack. I think that when we're doing this work, and the times when we get offended that someone would dare, say something we did was racist, or something we said was racist, or that we weren't being equitable, it's because we are, again, centering ourselves and our feelings. We're not centering the work. We're not centering, the person who's telling us, because that's work to tell somebody that, right? Like, you're just thinking only about yourself. So I think a lot of people, in order to do this work, have to do some soul searching and some reflecting and some reading, and to hear something and know that you don't have to respond, to think about something that someone said and give it time, and then maybe come back to it, but not to argue your point. Oh, here's what I mean. Listen to understand, not to reply. That's it.
That is a concept on Facebook that I think we all could learn something from. That's tough. But I
Yeah,
love that. I
deeply.
think, yeah, it's about centering the work, right? It's about making sure that you can take the time to remove yourself from it, because I think it is so hard when we're talking about these things to not take your lived experience and the way that society has treated you in whatever form, to not to take that out. And I think I love that you're talking about not responding. I think often it is taking what someone has pointed out and accepting that and figuring and sitting with it in its discomfort. I think
Mhm.
that can be a really important part of this work that we can all learn from.
We assume that when we're doing these difficult things, we need to be safe in order to do it.
Mm,
And it's not about safety, really. It's about being brave enough to take that step toward someplace uncomfortable and to stick with it.
yeah.
That's what I really think. I don't think that safe is really the word for it. So.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. I think we have been conditioned to believe that a lot of our workspaces and the way that we grow is in a safe spot, right? Where we can ask questions or we can choose not to. Yeah, but I think a lot
Mhm.
of that doesn't help us grow. A lot of that helps to uphold the status quo, and a lot of that won't help. The end goal is to create an environment for our students that is better than the one that we grew up in. So I think if that's the
Yeah,
goal, we can't keep doing the same thing. And I don't know. I
right.
really appreciate you saying that. I think it can be really hard, especially in our online forums, which, given coronavirus, given all these things, that can be just a major way that we're all communicating. And certainly, I'm sure we've all seen on Facebook things, conversations that have gone awry. And I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah.
I know,
Very
as a
quickly.
moderator of a group, I'm sure you see the most of that.
Nice. Yeah. It's definitely something I took on knowing full well what it was going to be, but feeling that at the time it was so important that I was just going to go ahead and do it anyway. So I am very grateful to have that opportunity. I'm grateful to work with that organization, and I actually enjoy a lot of the conversations we have there. So it's
Yeah,
good.
I mean,
Good time.
I can say I've certainly learned a lot from those conversations in that group, and I really
Mhm.
appreciate you gave a great list of other resources as well, that I think our audience will really benefit from. For the sake of time, I think we're going to have to wrap up today. We've got a little bit of a time limit, but I so appreciate all
Mhm.
of your efforts to share your expertise with us, and I hope that we will. I know we'll hear more from you in the future. And I know you shared your email address. Are you okay
Mhm.
with folks contacting you if they have any questions?
Yes. Yes,
Wonderful.
absolutely. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Ms. Melzer, for your help, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.